going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to my blog. Alright, so in the last two vlogs we've covered the Silconians and the Odrayans, and today we are completing the trilogy of dominant breeds with the standing. Now the standing, probably the most justified in being a dominant breed in the fact that they are so prevalent, and if you wanted to take dominant and prevalent to be the same thing, then it does make a lot of sense that they are classed that way. But at the same time, obviously within the hierarchy, that's not really what dominant refers to. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. Now, with both the Silconians and the Odrayans, I talked a little bit about what defines the breed as that particular breed. And with the standing, for the most part, their defining feature, the fact that they are non-magic users. They don't have powers, they don't have the ability to use magic, for the most part. But there is a minority amongst the standing who are Rima users, and exclusively Rima users. And I touched on this a little bit in one of my previous vlogs, with the idea that the Rima power is inherited down the father's line. So although women can be Rima users, unless they have a child with a male Rima user, then it's not likely to be passed on to their child or to their children. There is a lot of in multiverse debate as to why there are Rima users amongst the standing, because the standing are defined by the fact that they are non-magic users, and yet there's a minority that can use magic. Are they actually standing, or are they something else? And there is a slight belief that maybe they are what remain of the Chaosen, because the Chaosen were capable of using Rima magic, or at least some Chaosen were capable of using Rima magic, not all of them. And it's sort of maybe they are descendants from the Chaosen and they're not, true standing, they're just standing who bred with Chaosen, and that's why it's inherited down that way. But at the same time, there's nothing to prove that one way or the other, so most people just accept that although most standing are non-magic users, there is a magic using minority. I guess that's as good as I can explain that. The standing are defined by something that isn't a 100% rule. Just because. So, unlike I did explain why the Silconians got the name the Silconians, and I did sort of briefly touch on why the Odrayans are the Odrayans, but I think in terms of naming origins and sort of in lore naming origins, standing may have a more interesting story. They evolved in a counter line to the Odrayans. So when the Odrayans sort of got through their Chaosen state and were in their Odrayan state, they started paying attention to this line of apes, I guess, that was slowly evolving into, Homo sapiens, essentially. And to begin with, they weren't paying much attention to them. They considered them to just be like, less interesting than any other animal, or, some might have said slightly more interesting than some animals, but there wasn't this general thought that they were anything more than just, another form of ape, another, animal, and kind of an unimportant footnote. But there was a particular scientist whose surname happened to be Standing. I can't actually remember what her full name is off the top of my head, and I probably should have looked that up before starting this, but never mind. Anyway, she was studying this developing breed of ape, for want of a better term, and and discovered that actually no, they were very intelligent. There were a lot of things about the way their society was starting to structure itself, which was very reminiscent of, you know, O'Drayan early culture, or rather Chaosen culture, early culture. And she basically, because it is a she, because of course it is, she was very adamant about pushing the idea that, you know, actually no, we should be paying attention to these apes. I believe that they are just as human as we are. So, you know, based on that, mockingly, a lot of O'Drayans started referring to them as standings humans, to sort of mock her ideas and to, you know, belittle this developing breed of humans, because at that point in time, you know, certainly in a lot of the realms and a lot of the realities where the standing were developing, the O'Drayans didn't have any other real point of reference. Yes, they knew, you know, there were gods and there were higher beings and, you know, all of that kind of thing, but they considered those to be completely different to themselves, and they hadn't really, for the most part, come across anything similar to themselves. So the idea that something similar to them could exist was very heavily mocked and very, you know, scandalous almost. But as time went on and more people sort of read the research of standing and actually looked into it themselves and whatnot, they started to realise, well, no, actually, the standing are they are something. They are more than likely to be a bit like us, not exactly like us, but they have the capacity to think like we do. They have the capacity to build a society like we do. They're not just animals. They're something else. They're something other. They are something human. So begrudgingly, the O'Drayans began to acknowledge that the standing were their own breed, but in the same sense as they do everything, they remained wanting to have this superiority over them. So instead of being standings humans, they became standing human, to sort of mock the fact that that was all they seemed to be able to do, because they didn't display any magical ability for the most part at that point, or at that point hadn't really shown any inclination towards any magical abilities. So the idea that they're standing human because all they can do is stand was very funny and very amusing, and it just stuck. More than anything else, it just stuck. And eventually the human part was dropped and they were just referred to as standing, which, you know, may or may not improve the situation, but yeah, so I always consider that a fairly interesting tidbit of information about the standing, and it is something that occasionally comes up in the writing, but it's one of those things that it's never played a huge part, because although I could at some point like fully explore that story and, you know, write about the particular scientist and the struggles that she went through in the discovery that the standing were in fact human and trying to get people to believe her. That'll probably make for a really interesting story when I come around to doing it, but I haven't done it yet. So all I've really done is had basically what I've said to you, the sort of basic gist of they have their name for these two reasons. They're named after the first person who recognise them as being human, and they are also named in a way that kind of mocks them. But the standing do get their revenge. Certainly in the Circle of Six, it is the actions of the standing that cause the disconnection to happen, or they're the sort of the inciting incident, and, you know, their enslavement of the Silconians is very much the driving force behind the decisions made that lead to the disconnection of the Circle of Six. So yeah, you can very much see that as them getting their revenge of, you know, basically being looked down on, which, you know, it's not nice and it's not fair for anybody. Certainly not, you know, a breed that okay, yes, the majority of the population is lacking in magic, but they are resourceful. They're the ones who create the Rima technology, and they are very, very intelligent in their utilization of magic, or the utilization of tools that require magic to run. And it's kind of, they are fascinating in the way that they themselves see the minority of magic users both as being an incredible resource and something to be wary of, and something to be careful of, because they have the power that, you know, the majority of the population don't have, and they're the ones with the abilities to make or break the society, regardless of whether or not, you know, the Rima user necessarily realizes it. There is definitely a caution there's definitely a concern there, even within, you know, the standing population, but at the same time, they're revered, they're respected, they are the ones that have created all of this, you know, amazing stuff that makes life easier, that, you know, makes the world run a lot smoother. Unless, of course, you're in the disconnected realities, in which case, you know, there's no magic. The disconnection is all about taking away everybody's power to equal the playing field across everything. But yeah, that's a story that you can go read eventually. when I finish publishing Blood, Friendship and Marriage series, that is the story that is told within that. And you do get a little bit of it in the fanfic, or that version of it. So you could always just go read the fanfic if you're curious now. You don't get the full story. So. But yeah, no, I like the standing. They can often be antagonist characters, but there's something about writing the standing, because you're just basically writing the point of view of somebody who is non-magical and doesn't have to it's the normal person within the magical world, and that is an interesting thing to write, and it's an interesting thing to sort of characterize, and there's nothing wrong with having those characters. It's just knowing how and when to utilize them properly, and it's one of the reasons why I like writing characters going from the disconnected world, or a disconnected world, into a world which does utilize magic and does use magic, and getting their reaction, because it's such a completely different environment. And you know, the average standing probably doesn't come across magic that often, and when they do come across it, you know, depending on what reality they are in, it is something they find fascinating. It is something that is new and different and exciting, and it's kind of like, you know, what I would want my readers to sort of feel, very much what I would want my readers to sort of feel, sort of going in and you know, seeing this world which is different to, you know, the world that we're living in, and how, you know, you can react to that, and having, you know, a group of characters that are mostly by definition non-magic users, it's a nice way of getting readers sort of in, and yeah, the standing are very useful. And as I said, they have one of the more interesting naming stories. I'm not saying that the Silconian story in its world isn't incredibly interesting, because it is. I do like the standing, and I think, although I would want to be Silconian within my multiverse, and that would be the desired result, I think I'm more likely to end up being a standing. Because let's face it, you're never the interesting person in your own story, are you? Or you are the most interesting person in your own story. It depends on your perspective. Completely depends on perspective. So yeah, I would very much want to be Silconian, but let's face it, I'm probably a non-magic using standing. So, I don't think there's much more that I can really say on the standing, so I think I'm going to leave it there. bringing my three-parter to close. I know, so sad. So, for the next vlog, I think it's finally time to talk about the 10th Order. But only because I've mentioned it a number of times in certainly in the last two vlogs, not in this one, but in the last two vlogs, I've definitely talked about it a few times. So I think talking about the 10th Order in the next vlog is a good idea. Whether I cover everything or whether I narrow it down to just a couple of things and, you know, maybe spread it over, hopefully not sequential ones. We'll see. But for now, I hope you found this interesting, and I will see you next time. See ya!